So I'm going to run through my presentation, talk to you about some of the innovative things we did, some of the good and the bad, and then I have a couple of things specific to new grantees. Now, it hops around like that every time. It pops. He said it pops, so it hops around like that. Y'all don't get seasick when it does it. Okay, so here's the context for our infrastructure programs under Katrina Rita and under Gustav Ike, the number of parishes and impact and the amount of allocation under each. What I wanted to highlight here was just the different ways that we in infrastructure administered these. Under Katrina Rita, such a large disaster, the state at that point stood up a separate agency, the Louisiana Recovery Authority, and for infrastructure, the Recovery Authority decided the state would contract out a grant management firm. So that firm works for the state, and it's tasked with going out into the parishes and working with them on application development, making sure their files are where they need to be. Under Gustav Ike, different disaster, different administration, different approach. It was more local control. So under Gustav Ike, the state did not take that approach. They said the parishes, if they so choose to contract out for their grant management services, they can use their allocation to do that. They can procure them. It's in their hands. So the reason I highlight that is because I've actually talked to a couple of folks here who had questions about that. I'm happy to elaborate. I have good and bad on both. I don't side with either approach, but I can tell you some of the positives and negatives to both approaches. Okay, now I have to warn you, I know some of you are looking at your BlackBerry. If you're looking at your BlackBerry and then you jump up to the screen when it's hopping around like that, you're going to fall out your chair. Okay, so to Neil, if you see somebody fall out, you know they went BlackBerry to the roller coaster PowerPoint. It just was too much for them. Here's some of the innovative programs that I wanted to highlight. Under Gustav Ike, we had a municipal infrastructure program. We heard from some of our smaller towns, municipalities in Louisiana, that while we work with the parishes and the allocations to the parishes are great, there were still some unmet needs down to the municipal level. And we're talking in Louisiana, we're talking villages with very small populations, but we wanted to give them an opportunity at some grant funds. So we set up a competitive municipal infrastructure program. We worked with our Louisiana Municipal Association, which is a consortium organization in Louisiana that has the developed network to communicate with all of these municipalities. We tiered it to populations less than 1,500 was one grant award, and then to populations greater than 1,500 was a separate pot. So it started out as $30 million. We later added an additional $5 million. Very successful program. We had a great partnership with the Municipal Association. They had, as I said, the developed network. We did tremendous outreach. We did regional meetings. It was a great experience and a great way for some of these smaller towns who were impacted by the storm to have access to some of the disaster grant funds. Fisheries in Louisiana, perhaps no other industry has been more impacted over the last 7 years than our fisheries industries. From the 4 storms to the oil spill, the fisheries have suffered tremendously. And when Katrina and Rita hit, the state recognized that early on, and they set up a separate program to specifically restore damaged fisheries infrastructure. This is not direct grants to fishermen. This is going into the parishes, finding out what infrastructure that fisheries, commercial and industrial fisheries used, and restoring or improving that infrastructure. So we set up a pretty large program under Katrina Rita, and then 3 years later when Gustav Ike struck, we did an additional round of funding. The Katrina Rita fisheries, also competitive. We had a series of experts come in to judge and award 25 projects. Under Gustav Ike, we actually partnered with our Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries to make those awards. Interoperable communications. This is a Gustav Ike program under CDBG, but the history on that is our Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness after Katrina recognized that we needed a statewide communication, first responder communication network So FEMA actually funded, after the Katrina Rita disaster, that statewide system. When Gustav Ike struck, several holes were discovered. Several of the tower sites actually went down, so you had parishes not able to communicate outside of their parish lines. So the intent of that system didn't serve what it was supposed to during the Gustav Ike disaster. So following Gustav Ike, we allocated $17 million to GOSEP, the Homeland Security Office, for them to make improvements to that existing system. And this has been a really effective project. They've actually moved the dollars very quickly, and the parishes, particularly first responders, were extremely excited about that. I put non-traditional infrastructure projects. I'm going to show you a few examples, but I actually could have just put City of New Orleans up there when you talk about non-traditional infrastructure. Under Katrina, they got $410 million. So we're doing everything from cutting grass to paying salaries to self-seconds mortgage programs. I mean, if we can push the envelope, the City of New Orleans is probably doing it. Now, Scott's back there eyeing me. We keep it in the box, Scott. Don't worry. We keep a hold of them. But non-traditional, if you've got questions or examples, feel free to shoot them off at me, because we probably do it in New Orleans. But here's a few examples of some non-traditional. This I wanted to show because this is under the Gustav Ike disaster, and this is actually an example of how we used economic revitalization as a rationale for an infrastructure project. If you're not familiar with that term, we received from HUD guidance that if you can't show a direct tie to the disaster, the community can show how it was impacted by the storms. And so in this instance, this small town of Maringouin could actually show us they took on more population after the storm, and so they had an increased need for first responder services. So they didn't lose their fire truck in the storm. It wasn't like the fire truck stopped working after the storm. They needed additional capacity, and so we used the economic revitalization rationale to approve that application and have this great ceremony. East Baton Rouge Parish is the capital of Louisiana, the capital parish of Louisiana. Under Katrina, they were the parish that a large majority of people evacuated to. So a lot of New Orleans folks, Southeast Louisiana folks, and then under Rita, Southwest Louisiana folks came into East Baton Rouge. East Baton Rouge retained a lot of that population, those who couldn't return. So their population increased significantly. 3 years later, here comes Gustav, damages or impacts East Baton Rouge Parish. So they now have taken on things like a larger homeless population. They had some transportation infrastructure issues. So they came to us and said, listen, we need CDBG funds to pay for a plan, a study. We need to pay a consulting firm to tell us a master plan of how to address this population influx followed by the damage to our infrastructure. So $2 million for that project, and we'll also work with them on the back end to implement some of those projects. Here's an example of a fisheries infrastructure. Not a great picture, but public docks. We do ice houses, anything to help restore the fisheries infrastructure. I will mention under the fisheries program, we do get into the realm of program income. Some of these docks, they're selling at. If we do an ice house, they're selling through that. So we recognize that going in, but it was worth it to help restore the fisheries industry. Okay, if we had to do it over, the municipal infrastructure program I talked about a minute ago, how tremendous it was, how great it was. I got called before the legislature twice and told how terrible it was. So when you have a competitive program, when you have a limited pot of funds, we had $30 million, $35 million, and we got $120 million worth of applications. So we told a lot of people no. We told a lot of small town mayors, we can't fund you. So that made it challenging. And when you tell a small town mayor no, they call their legislator, and that legislator is not afraid to call or call your governor about it. So the competitive aspect, while it was good, we set it up just like the state's regular program. It provided some challenges on the back end, and as did the limited funding. Fisheries was a great opportunity to do some outreach into these fisheries communities. We have experienced challenges and slower moving projects due to the fiscal agents. We're talking fisheries co-ops that wanted to serve as their own fiscal agents. In some cases, if they showed us the capacity, we allowed them to do that. In some cases, a $1.5 million grant was something they had never experienced before, so we tried to get them to partner up with a parish government or an economic development agency. Sometimes those partnerships didn't work. We had one example where a fisheries co-op, the head of that co-op had a cousin who was friends with the police jury president. It was just bad stuff. They never got along, and the project just never took off the ground. So, again, the limited funding was also a challenge here because we had obviously expressed more need than we had funding for. Okay, a couple of items specific to new grantees I wanted to highlight. We have a grantee administration manual. And listen, I brought this as carry-on luggage, so y'all have to appreciate this visual aid. This was in my briefcase on the airplane, so y'all gotta, I mean, it's heavy. It's heavy. This is a living document that we actually borrowed from other states to compile, but it essentially tells the grantee what their responsibilities are in every aspect, from environmental review to procurement, records management. It lays it out for them. Where's my friends from North Dakota? We pretty much stole a lot of this from y'all, so appreciate that. Tennessee, we just copied and pasted. Where it said Tennessee, we put Louisiana. We were good. So I want y'all to do the same. I got the web address up here. Y'all go steal it. It's in PDF format by chapter. Really, really helpful when, under Gustav Ike, when we have grantees or consultants call us, the first thing we got to ask them is, have you looked in the grantee manual? You got to be able to look there first. So next thing, actually was really excited to highlight, but we kind of covered it yesterday, is when I came on board, what significantly delayed projects. And those were the two biggies. Now there are others. Obviously, we talked through some of them yesterday in the afternoon sessions, but procurement, if the procurement policy is not there, all things come to a halt. And then the environmental review is so critical, but we all learned about that yesterday. We won't have any issues going forward. Boom. Thank you for your attention. How about that? Earl, you got to tell me if that was sexy enough. All right. All right? There's my contact info. I guess the last thing I would say is I've talked to a few folks here, one particular from Pennsylvania who said, I got this councilman, he just says, write me a check, I'll spend the money. Surround yourself with a good staff who knows you walk that balance between compliance and pushing dollars out the door as quickly as possible. I'm extremely blessed. I have a great staff who does that, and we recognize, we walk that fine line, but that's critical when you're implementing these infrastructure projects. They're not going to move as fast as the public and the elected officials want them to. But if you can push hard and push them out as quickly as possible while keeping them compliant, that's the way to go about it. Okay, so Kathleen was originally supposed to go first. She's very upset with me because she's thinking he just blew their mind with that PowerPoint presentation right there. That whole audience was mesmerized. Y'all give her some encouragement. She's going to come follow it up.
Yeah, I don't know if I can speak now. I'm dizzy from the presentation, and this is going to be a hard act to follow. I am passionate about what I'm going to talk about, but I don't know if Earl's going to think it's sexy. But I'll tell you what, I love everything we do, and I love CDBG, but I love this program that we've done with planning. Most of you that are in the room that had the Ike disaster funds know that there was something called DREF involved with that, for that forward thinking, mitigation planning, that kind of thing. That's basically what we've done here. Indiana, flooding is our costliest hazard. It's our most common hazard. We rank 5th in annual median flood damages nationwide, and 2008 was particularly devastating for us. Obviously, most of you in the room, a lot of the disasters we've had have been flooding related, so you know that we're talking about loss of life, evacuation, property loss. We had 3 federally declared disasters in 2008 in 3 separate areas of the state, and they were all flooding related. So what we wanted to do was to help make our communities more resilient. Part of our mission as the Office of Community and Rural Affairs is to help our small rural communities become sustainable, become resilient to things like disaster. So something I'm going to talk a lot about today, and is short of a time as I possibly know how to do because I love this, is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Silver Jackets program. I know there's somebody here from the state of Vermont, and I think Vermont is probably, with Indiana, the most active Silver Jackets organization in the country. But is anybody in here besides me familiar with Silver Jackets? Is it? Okay. Silver Jackets is an Army Corps of Engineers initiative that is basically an interagency state and federal partnerships to basically look at predominantly water hazard mitigation. And I'm going to try and go as quickly as I can, but it's a phenomenal program where a lot, let me see if I've got there. Well, first, these are all Silver Jackets organizations. If you're a green state, you have an active Silver Jackets entity. If you're in the room and you have a green state, please find out who your Silver Jackets people are and become involved with them. These are some of the state and federal partners that are involved. It's the Corps of Engineers, U.S. Geological Survey, FEMA, USDA, NRCS. We've got our Department of Natural Resources, Environmental Management. We have some science entities that are part of our universities, our Homeland Security, and us. And we work together cooperatively on things that are predominantly water, but hazard mitigation programs. We funded, because of the DREF funds, we wanted to make sure that also, as a state program, it's very difficult for us to do planning on a larger scale because we have to meet a national objective. For those of you that are entitlements in the room, you may not be aware of that because you can do planning at any time. But as a state program, when you make a grant to a local unit of government for planning, you have to meet a national objective, LMA, slum and blight, something. In your disaster program, when you carry out an activity directly, you don't have to meet that national objective, so you can do a true planning-only activity. So we were able to fund projects that were statewide. 82 of our 92 counties were affected. Most of our planning projects are a statewide initiative, and the state or USGS, whoever our partner was, kicked in the funds to cover the 10 counties that were not eligible for CDBG funding. And we were able to do these planning-only activities. We allocated approximately $13 million for these planning-only activities. Like I said, we got a total for IKE $348 million, so we allocated a nice chunk of that to these planning-only activities. The projects are, and I am not a scientist, so I'm going to do the best I can, National Hydrography data set, a flood response model, flood inundation mapping, and the one I think is really sexy, fluvial erosion hazard mapping. Some statewide LIDAR, which is high-resolution photography, risk map, and Indiana floodplain information portal. So those are the projects. National Hydrography, basically, what it means is when you're doing resolution for floodplain mapping, what we had was 1 to 24,000. We were able to buy up to do a project to get us 1 to 2,400 resolution. So to any scientist in the room, that just means you have a better picture. It's just closer, better mapping potential. In Orange County, Indiana, we have a river called the Lost River. It actually flows underground, and whenever there's flooding, you don't know that it's rising because it's all underground, and then all of a sudden the water pops up from underground and floods. And so we're doing a project with the Corps of Engineers and the USGS to study that river and try and, figure out how they can do modeling to know when that river is going to appear. Flood inundation mapping is exactly what it sounds like. They basically map a river and, it's like a floodplain mapping, but it's a wider scale where they can actually map to see where the water is going to go. They don't just define the floodplain. They do a better job of mapping where that flood water is actually going to go. There's a USGS web portal that they're putting all of this information into as part of the project. Fluvial erosion hazard, like I said, this is the one I really love. Everybody knows about flood inundation, that the water, crests, it comes out of the river and it inundates the area around it. What people don't think about, and one of the real risks that we have in Indiana is erosion, because for whatever reason, you have a river that's going a particular direction. I think my next slide might show it. And then it changes course over time and it erodes. And we have power lines and houses that are falling into rivers because it's actually changed the course of the river because of the amount or volume of water. And so, they didn't build in a floodplain, but the river changed course. So this project will actually help them figure out where that water is going to go and how it's going to change direction. And it's going to be an amazing mapping tool that we didn't have at all in Indiana. So that's basically, you've got a straight river and they're going to be able to say, but here's where it's going to go. Statewide LIDAR project, again, it's another high resolution photography. I don't have the actual amount, but I think we're going from like a 12-foot resolution to like a 2-foot resolution. So again, it just makes for better mapping for local governments, your state planners, things like that. Risk Map is a FEMA initiative, but it's not a funded initiative, is my understanding. And so every state is working on Risk Map. Your state, whoever does your GIS and your floodplain mapping, is working on this. They have to come up with the funds to do all of their own mapping. So we're going to be mapping 3,200 miles of unmapped streams that didn't have any mapping on them done prior. And in the 2008 floods, our biggest damage was the Columbus Regional Hospital, and it was not flooded by a river, and it was not flooded by a lake. It was flooded by a creek. By a creek that a year later, when I went to a dedication, there was less than an inch of water in the bottom of that creek, and that's what it typically looked like. And because of the 2008 floods, it literally filled the banks of this little creek and then basically flooded an entire hospital. So being able to map streams and creeks that had never been mapped before is a great thing. The floodplain information portal is something where all of this information, all of these projects, all of these agencies, like I said, they're working together. They're sharing data with each other. If somebody says, oh, I have, XYZ data, but it's from 1997, somebody else might say, oh, well, we have that data, but it's from 2009. So they're not recreating data and they're just giving each other data, and we're just working together on all of these projects. But we're enhancing this portal to, again, local units of government will actually be able, when it's all said and done, they'll be able to go in and, some chief elected official in a small rural community will be able to go in and say, I want to predict a 14-inch rain over a 24-hour period. Now show me where the water's going to go. And they can put any scenario in that they want. So our accomplishments, all of our projects are on track to be completed in 2013. They're all complementary. Like I said, all of these organizations are working together, sharing data. We're doing projects together. The partnerships have been amazing. State and local government will be able to use this data in their mitigation planning. And again, the scale of work wouldn't have been done without the Silver Jackets' participation. We have actually decided, now I was not involved in Silver Jackets. They have been asking us as a funding organization to be involved for years. We joined after the 2008 floods because I didn't think it was important. I didn't think I had time. And now we've realized that we've actually created an Office of Disaster Recovery. So when the next event happens, we already have partnerships, we already have relationships, we already know what each other is doing, what funds are capable of doing. You can do this piece, I can do this piece, how are we going to do it together? It's all about long-term recovery, obviously not response, but it's just an amazing thing. So what would we do again? I would get involved with my Silver Jackets organization earlier, make those partnerships, understand who's in your Homeland Security office or your FEMA people, all of these other agencies, so that you have those partnerships when you are trying to deal with your disaster money. The most challenging thing is that I am not a science person, and so usually I sit in those meetings and they talk way over my head, and then I say, so does that mean we're on track? Like, yes, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down because I have no idea what you just said. So that was challenging, learning about flooding, and my boss thinks I'm now like, can answer all questions related to flooding, and that's not really true, but I don't tell him that. What didn't work? There really wasn't a lot that didn't work. It's the things that were hardest were figuring out, making sure that we weren't duplicating any work, making sure that we weren't duplicating benefits in terms of what could USGS pay for and what were we paying for and what was FEMA already doing, and working all of that out. And I'm not sure, again, that I would change anything other than get involved earlier and make sure that I have those relationships in place so that if we get hit with another disaster, we already have, I have technical people now who can help advise. Our NDOT, our Department of Transportation is involved, so we have those relationships that we can, figure out how to address long-term recovery and mitigation of future hazards in our state. So, thank you very much.
Well, what a couple of good presentations. Kathleen, just a friendly reminder that Iowa was the Silver Jackets Team of the Year last year. Want to make sure you saw that memo. And Rowdy, I'm disappointed now because I didn't get the sexy email from Earl. I missed that one. But anyway, last on the agenda, so I'll just keep things moving here if I could. Iowa has a fairly traditional infrastructure program, or at least that's what I'm highlighting today. A little bit of quick background. We received or utilized $177 million for 90 separate contracts to cities and counties, predominantly for sanitary sewer relining projects, rebuilding projects, but also some storm sewer, and we even did get into some of the bigger things like roads, bridges, and dams, flood walls, that type of thing. We also did partner with FEMA, and we do have a FEMA HMGP program that we contributed 25% to. Again, just 90 separate contracts, and many of these contracts and much of the awards did go to entitlement cities. You can see much of it went to through the larger cities in Iowa, Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, and Iowa City. Coralville also has I think we've got about 4 or 5 contracts with them. To date, roughly half, about 50 of those projects have been monitored, and I typically like to go out and monitor a project when it's about at least 50% constructed, and then you've got a better shot at typically having Davis-Bacon to look at, and some of those other things that you can, a good choice of invoice and things to review. At this point in time, 11 of those projects have been closed out, and 2 of the projects have been withdrawn. So we continue to make progress. And I know everybody's been dying to see Iowa's version of the FEMA counties that were declared. I believe the orange would be public and individual assistance, and the beige would be just public assistance. Iowa has roughly 9 separate major watersheds in the state. two of which flow west to the Missouri, and you can tell that the most northerly one of those didn't have much damage, but all 8 other watersheds had significant flooding events, two of which go to the Missouri, and 7 of which flow to the Mississippi. And these are just a highlight of the cities that we both awarded, were highlighted in green, cities and counties, and the ones we did not award to are in beige. So a great distribution of funds. It really just kind of worked out that way, as you know, with competitive water sewer programs, which I think many of you do in here. You try to spread things around a little bit, and it just so happened that that's how it worked here. That's how the applications came in. Once we got applications, 2 project managers reviewed the applications based on the criteria we set up in our action plan. The criteria were urgency of the need regarding health, safety, and welfare, whether there was sufficient other local, state, or federal funds available, use of additional taxes or user fees that were potential, likelihood the project would be completed in a timely manner, and some cities were looked at fairly hard in this regard because there was some experience with them not performing in the past. And then also, of course, the LMI indicators. And under the first criteria, urgency of the need for health, safety, and welfare, we decided that we needed to break that down into a little bit more objective criteria. So we prioritized those, and the priority was sanitary sewer issues, and then sanitary sewer issues that were impacted by storm sewer overflows. Third was storm sewers, and then actually much further down the list are things like roads, bridges, levees, and some of the miscellaneous improvement projects that cities wanted. What worked well? Really nothing unique here. As many of you do, we have a existing competitive water sewer program, so we obviously took our first steps from that program and used some of those guidelines and framework of how they operate that program. And we did require that COGS, or the councils of government, submit applications for cities or counties. And actually, we do allow private engineering firms to act as administrators also, but predominantly COGS. And I think that helped both the city in the administration, and I think it's a good way to help keep the project moving along too, is by using the COG to keep things going. What did not work well? Our match program with FEMA hasn't really taken off. A couple of reasons, I think. Initially, we didn't have an LMI requirement. It could be either LMI or urgent need. So we got a lot of both, and we went ahead and made some awards based on that. But certainly we didn't use all of our money. And then as we started looking at our LMI progress, we determined that we weren't meeting our state LMI requirements. So we had to put a criteria on future HMGP projects that they be only for LMI eligible communities. And it really kind of shut down the program. Couple of things. One is the LMI requirement, but secondly, I think some of the cities believe that by adding our Davis-Bacon requirements for only 25% of the money, to have to add that to the entire project. I think there was a fear out there that it would really inflate the project cost too much. Whether that's accurate or not, I don't believe it is, but that certainly is the perception out there. And then with our regular infrastructure program, we did decide to fund some of our lower priority projects, and we've come to regret that. we've come to learn that I think things like levees and flood walls belong to the Corps of Engineer rather than CDBG funds, and roads and bridges really do belong to, perhaps better for DOT to do those kind of large projects. The time frame to do environmental for roads and bridges is just much too long for what we were trying to shoot for to turn some of these projects around. There was also initially there was no clear requirement in the application whether there had to be a city match or an LMI requirement. Some cities submitted applications, and they specifically did include some match money, either through their bonding or raising their sewer rates or something. But many cities didn't, and we ended up having to really kind of overlook that and just award based on the project itself. There was also no incentive to add any green into the project. So I think we regret not having that part of it. What worked well? And again, nothing unique here. Just there were some additional staff brought in, including myself, for the disaster. But our existing staff in economic development they really had the perspective of Iowans helping the Iowans, and it was and still is a lot of additional work for the existing staff there. Another thing that I believe worked well, and maybe this would be a question to all of you, is roughly 12 months after the storm events, we had awarded $16 million we had contracted for $16 million, roughly 9% of our award. 18 months into this process, we had awarded $110 million, or roughly 60%. I'm sorry, we have contracted for that amount. And then in December 2010, which is roughly 30 months after, we've got all of our contracts signed, except for one actually. We also have a very good working relationship with the DNR, and I think that has helped. We had monthly meetings or quarterly meetings to on the front end let them know that they're going to be getting inundated with sewer applications or water supply system applications in the next couple of months. What did not work well? I think in part due to the quick turnaround of our application process. I think some of the estimates that came in were out of range. I think some engineers threw numbers together and then perhaps doubled them to make sure that they got enough money, and others just didn't do their due diligence and give us an accurate number. So there has been a lot of requests for amendments to contracts and change orders, which we've been able to handle okay. And last but not least, we did have an issue with an Iowa City project, which is the one contract we have not awarded yet, and it's for a levee literally in the downtown area of the city. And for a couple of reasons, I think. We've got a highly educated citizenry that really questions what their city council is doing. And although I believe the city staff is doing all of their due diligence with public notifications and public input, but that's one that's giving us a little bit of fun to work with. And in the essence of time, I think that's it. And I think we'll all take questions right now.